You really thought I wouldn't find out? The words sliced through the silence like a blade, as Eleanor Whitman, CEO of Crestline Dynamics, held up her phone with a blurry photo, her disheveled in bed. Across from her sat James Carter, calm and unmoved. A single black father and senior analyst, James had only done what any decent person would: drive his intoxicated boss home safely after the company party. But now, that kindness was being twisted into a weapon. Eleanor's voice dripped with malice. You took advantage of me. Men like you always do. James remained composed, but he had seen this coming. The condescending remarks, the brazen remarks, subtle double standards, the quiet racism masked as professionalism. He had documented it. All. Every dismissive glance, every time she questioned his reports while approving less competent white colleagues. He had recorded everything, including the events of that night. When Eleanor tried to paint herself as the victim, James revealed he had evidence: audio, timestamps, and even her own building security footage. But what she didn't know was that James had been preparing for this for years. From growing up in the foster system to serving in the military, he had learned to expect injustice and how to fight back. Now, with the help of a top civil rights attorney, James was turning the tables. Eleanor's scheme would not only collapse, it would expose a company-wide pattern of discrimination. And this time, justice wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Because when you threaten a man who's lost everything but rebuilt for his daughter's future, you don't just spark a fight, you start a revolution. They thought he'd be easy to silence, until the truth came knocking with receipts. For 5 years, James Carter had been one of the most dependable senior analysts at Crestline Dynamics. A quiet black man with military discipline and the heart of a devoted single father, he never made waves, never missed a deadline, and always showed up early to pick up his daughter from school. But none of that mattered when his boss, Eleanor Whitman, a powerful and calculating CEO, decided to use him as a scapegoat. It all began after the company's annual party. Eleanor had been drinking heavily and was visibly distressed when James found her crying alone in the restroom. Like any decent human being, he offered to drive her home safely. She could barely stand, slurring her words and leaning heavily on him. He made sure she got inside, placed a glass of water by her bedside, and quietly left. End of story, or so he thought. Monday morning, Eleanor summoned him to her office. Her eyes were icy, her voice sharp as glass. She showed him a photo, her in bed, looking disheveled. You took advantage of me, James. A man like you, alone with a woman like me? Do you really think people will believe your version of the story? It was more than an accusation. It was a threat. Eleanor knew the unspoken rules. A black man against a white woman in corporate America? The odds were stacked. James could feel the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. But what Eleanor didn't know was that James had spent his life preparing for moments like this. Raised in the foster system after his mother's death, he had learned early how to protect himself. 4 years in the Army taught him strategy, restraint, and vigilance. And every day, since entering the corporate world, he had kept meticulous records, not because he expected trouble, but because he knew how easily it could find him. He had video logs, email chains, and a discreet voice recorder that had captured every moment of the night in question. From finding Eleanor to escorting her safely home, nothing inappropriate, no misconduct, just proof of professionalism. But the story didn't stop there. What James had also documented were years of microaggressions, how his performance reviews were always a point lower than white, colleagues with worse results, how his ideas were credited to others in meetings, how promotions quietly passed him by. His files weren't just a defense, they were an indictment. When Eleanor filed a formal complaint to HR, James was ready. She painted a narrative of fear, of a misunderstanding, of blurred boundaries. HR placed James on unpaid suspension, whispering about how they just needed to investigate. In the eyes of the company, He was already guilty. That same day, James made a call to Amanda Rodriguez, a civil rights attorney known for the Wetterford, dismantling racist corporate systems. What he shared with her was explosive. Spreadsheets of biased review scores, emails laced with subtle prejudice, WhatsApp messages between executives mocking diversity hires, and most damning, an audio recording from a leadership meeting where Eleanor said, "People like him think they deserve the same treatment as those who actually built something in life." Amanda's reaction was swift. Not only did she file a racial discrimination suit, but she also contacted the Department of Justice, who had been investigating systemic bias across major firms. James's case became a linchpin, while Eleanor celebrated what she thought was her victory, firing a problem employee before he could cause legal drama. The FBI was already reviewing files submitted under James's name. On Monday morning, as Eleanor sipped her latte and reviewed slides for her investor lunch, federal agents walked into her office with badges and a subpoena. And as they played back her own voice, mocking and titled, dripping with supremacy, Eleanor realized the trap she had walked into. Not because James tricked her, but because she underestimated him. Because she thought a black man with a soft voice and a worn-out briefcase couldn't possibly hold power. But James Carter did. And now, with his daughter watching, he wasn't just defending himself. He was making sure no one else had to fight this battle alone. Because justice doesn't whisper. It arrives documented, time-stamped, and undeniable. By the time the whispers started, it was already too late. The trap had been set months before. On an ordinary Monday morning, James Carter arrived at his office at Crestline Dynamics to find eyes avoiding his. Smiles vanished. Conversations died as he walked by. Something had shifted. He knew why. Eleanor Whitman, the company's powerful CEO, had wasted no time. After accusing James, her black senior analyst, of inappropriate conduct following a night he had simply helped her home from a company party, she had gone into silent warfare. No direct accusations, just poisonous implications. "He was alone with me," she whispered to HR. "I woke up, confused." Words like vulnerable, boundaries, and discomfort floated into official records, without context. By Tuesday, James was suspended without pay pending an investigation. By Thursday, he received an email. "Do not return to company premises until further notice." In the span of 4 days, his career and reputation were shredded by a woman who saw his kindness as a weapon to be turned against him. But what Eleanor didn't know was that James had been preparing for this storm long before it arrived. He had grown up in the foster care system after losing his mother at age 12. He knew what it felt like to be treated as disposable. He had learned the hard way, document everything. In the Army, where his leadership was constantly questioned, he learned strategy. In college, where professors couldn't believe he aced complex courses, he learned restraint. And in the corporate world, where quiet racism came dressed in professional smiles, he learned patience. Now, every word, every email, every smirk Eleanor ever gave him was backed up digitally, stored, date-stamped, categorized. The night of the company party, fully recorded. From the moment he found her crying in the restroom to the second he walked out of her apartment, after ensuring she was safe and alone. He had even captured the building security timestamp that proved he had left long before the compromising photo she later showed HR was taken. But this wasn't just about disproving her lie. It was about something bigger. James met with Amanda Rodriguez, a civil rights attorney with a history of exposing corporate discrimination. He opened his laptop, revealing spreadsheets and folders that Amanda said were more organized than her own case files. "This is a class action lawsuit waiting to happen," she said, stunned. The data showed how Black and Latino employees consistently received lower evaluations, despite outperforming white colleagues. Promotions skipped over them. Opportunities denied, without explanation. And worst of all, a 23-minute audio clip from a board meeting where Eleanor and other executives discussed maintaining diversity without compromising quality. "This isn't just bias," Amanda said. "This is a systemic pattern." And while James shared his evidence with Amanda, Eleanor was in her office making calls. To Margaret Thompson, another executive. To legal counsel. Laughing, confident. "I got ahead of it," she told Margaret. "The last thing we need is another one of them trying to pull the race card." She had no idea James had installed a quiet system months earlier that recorded every word, every call, every cruel assumption. On Friday morning, while Eleanor met with investors over wine and imported cheese, the FBI walked into Crestline Dynamics. They didn't come to ask. They came with evidence. Audio, files, transcripts, security footage, HR system logs showing performance reviews. Eleanor had secretly altered to justify denying minority promotions. The company's CEO was furious. Government contracts were at risk. Stockholders demanded answers. Eleanor tried to explain, but her own voice, recorded saying, "A single black man against a respected white woman? We both know how that ends," drowned her out. By the end of the day, she was fired and under federal investigation, but James wasn't celebrating with champagne. He was home, reviewing math homework with his daughter Maya. She had asked, "Daddy, why do some people think they're better than others?" He looked at her, this brilliant 8-year-old who was his entire world, and replied, "Because they've never had to fight. But we fight smart, not angry. We fight with truth." And this time, the truth didn't just set him free. It set off a chain reaction that would change the company. And maybe, just maybe, the world Maya would grow up in. She thought she could bury the truth. But she didn't realize James Carter had been digging for years. When Eleanor Whitman, CEO of Crestline Dynamics, sat in the HR office flanked by company lawyers, she thought she had already won. James Carter, her black senior analyst, had been suspended. Her whispered narrative carefully crafted with implications but no hard evidence had taken root. She leaned forward, smug, watching as HR prepared to close the case. But then James spoke. "What if I told you I have proof? And that Sarah Chun does too?" A flicker of panic crossed Eleanor's face. Sarah Chun, the former assistant she fired months ago. The one who, in Eleanor's words, had tried to play the race card. The one no one believed, until now. Sarah had returned, quietly, strategically. And she wasn't alone. She had recordings, emails, meeting transcripts, conversations where Eleanor had dismissed her with racially charged diss, comments masked in corporate language. But that was just the beginning. James had been listening, observing, waiting. For 2.5 years, he had documented microaggressions, performance review manipulation, and blatant disparities between how black and white employees were treated. He hadn't acted out of anger, but out of necessity, because he knew what it was like to be gaslit by a system designed to erase people like him. He knew how it felt to be the first blamed, the last promoted, and the easiest to dismiss. And he wasn't just building a defense, he was preparing a reckoning. Partnering with civil rights attorney Amanda Rodriguez, James presented not just a legal case, but a systemic indictment. There were spreadsheets, charts, patterns, so clear even the most cynical HR rep couldn't deny them. And worst of all for Eleanor, there were recordings of her saying things she never imagined would be heard outside a closed-door meeting. Things like, "People like him grow up thinking they deserve the same treatment as those who built something in life. We have to manage diversity without lowering standards. You handle these things early, before they become a lawsuit." Every word had been captured, date-stamped, corroborated. What Eleanor never understood was that James wasn't just fighting for his job, he was fighting for something bigger, For his daughter Maya, who deserved to grow up in a world where dignity wasn't a privilege tied to race. For Sarah, who had been silenced. For every employee who had swallowed injustice just to survive the day. And the final blow came not from James, but from the Department of Justice. Amanda had sent James's files to federal investigators already reviewing corporate discrimination cases. His documentation was the missing link. The company Eleanor once ruled with an iron smile was now under full investigation. FBI agents entered the building. Executives panicked. Shareholders revolted. In the end, Eleanor's own arrogance undid her. She had underestimated a man who had learned long ago that silence doesn't mean weakness, and that the best revenge is not revenge at all. It's justice. When Maya asked James that evening, "Are the bad people gone?" he smiled and answered, "Not yet. But we're building a world where they can't win anymore." And that world had just taken one step closer to becoming real. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every door that had ever been slammed, shut in someone's face, just because of who they were. When James Carter walked into Amanda Rodriguez's law office, he wasn't looking for pity. He wasn't even looking for revenge. He came with a mission and a laptop full of truth. For years, James had been told to stay grateful. Grateful for the job. Grateful for the job. Paycheck. Grateful to be working alongside people who never once saw him as their equal. But James wasn't interested in survival anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. Dignity. Not just his own, but for everyone who had ever been disrespected, dismissed, or dehumanized inside a polished corporate building. Amanda Rodriguez, a sharp, no-nonsense civil rights attorney, had seen her share of the discrimination cases. But what James brought her was different. First, he showed her the spreadsheets, meticulously organized performance data that exposed a consistent pattern. Black and Latino employees at Crestline Dynamics received lower review scores than their white counterparts despite outperforming them. Promotions were disproportionately handed to white candidates. Negative feedback appeared more frequently and with less justification for people of color. And it wasn't just numbers, it was intent. Then came the emails. Seemingly polite, coded language filled every thread. Asterisk, he's not quite polished enough for a leadership role. Asterisk. Let's wait until he's more aligned with company culture. Followed by group chat screenshots between executives laughing about diversity hires and joking about avoiding another Sarah Chun situation. Amanda's expression hardened. "This isn't just bias," she said. "This is coordinated exclusion." But James wasn't done. With calm precision, he played a 23-minute audio clip, recorded during a confidential executive meeting. Eleanor Whitman's voice, clear and arrogant, spoke volumes. "We need to manage diversity expectations without compromising excellence. Some people grow up thinking equality means they're entitled to the same treatment. You handle them before they turn into lawsuits." Amanda leaned back in her chair. "James," she said slowly, "this isn't just an HR case. This is a federal civil rights violation. And you might just be the key to blowing it wide open." What Amanda didn't know was that James had been preparing for this for years, not out of malice, but out of necessity. He had seen the system protect itself too many times. He had watched brilliant colleagues of color disappear quietly, labeled unprofessional or not a ban, team fit. And each time he vowed, "Not me. Not again." So when Eleanor falsely accused him of misconduct after he'd helped her home drunk from a company party, James wasn't surprised. He was disappointed, but not unprepared. He had video proof, timestamps, and even security footage from her building that disproved her entire story. But more importantly, he had context. Years of documented systemic prejudice that would turn a personal accusation into a corporate reckoning. Amanda wasted no time. Within 48 hours, she filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and submitted James's evidence to the Department of Justice, which had already flagged Crestline Dynamics in a broader discrimination investigation. By the following week, FBI agents entered the company building. Executives panicked. Eleanor tried to spin the narrative, but it was too late. Her own voice had become the noose around her legacy. And James? He wasn't at the office that day. He was at home, reviewing Maya's science project, helping her design a volcano that erupts with vinegar and baking soda. She looked up at him and asked, "Are they going to say sorry, Daddy?" James smiled gently. "Maybe not. But they're going to learn they can't do it again. Because this wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about changing the rules of the game forever. And he had just made his first move. She thought she ended his career. She didn't realize he had just started writing her downfall. When Eleanor Whitman celebrated James Carter's suspension, she believed she had removed a threat. To her, James was just another problem employee, a quiet, intelligent black man who had dared to challenge the unspoken hierarchy of Crestline Dynamics. Her plan had seemed flawless. Use a blurry photo and a manufactured narrative to twist his kindness into utter misconduct. And when HR suspended him, she sipped champagne. What she didn't realize was that while she celebrated, James was building something far more powerful than any accusation, a case that would shake the foundation of the company itself. For 3 straight days after being barred from the office, James didn't rest. He organized files, cleaned audio clips, and cataloged every form of evidence he'd quietly gathered over the past 2.5 years. Years of watching qualified Black and Latino coworkers be overlooked. Years of noticing that executives like Eleanor praised mediocrity in white employees and questioned excellence in people of color. James had not only recorded meetings and saved emails, he had also discreetly installed a monitoring system months earlier, triggered by a gut instinct that told him people like Eleanor always reveal themselves when they think no one's watching. And she did. In a phone call with Margaret Thompson, another high-level executive, Eleanor boasted, "It's better to act quickly when someone like him starts getting bold. A single black man against a respected white woman, I've already won." What she didn't know was that the entire call had been recorded date, time, transcript. Her words, once private poison, had now become public evidence. That Friday, as she enjoyed a luxurious lunch at the city's most expensive restaurant, James was on a video call with agents from the Department of Justice. Amanda Rodriguez, his civil rights attorney, presented the evidence with precision. From manipulated HR reviews to internal emails, to audio from executive meetings. Each piece revealed a pattern of systemic discrimination and racial bias orchestrated under Eleanor's watch. And then came the bombshell. James's recordings of Eleanor herself admitting she had planned the false accusation from the beginning. The DOJ agents didn't just take interest. They launched a formal probe. By Monday morning, federal agents were standing in the lobby of Crestline Dynamics. HR was in chaos. Shareholders panicked. The company's CEO was livid. Inside her office, Eleanor was blindsided. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded as 2 agents played her own voice. "People like him think they deserve the same treatment. The courts still favor credibility, and we both know who gets believed." Her face drained of color. No denial could save her now. Not when the documents were signed by her, the emails sent from her account, and the performance review data showed clear, targeted manipulation. Even the building's security footage proved that the photo she had used as evidence was staged, taken hours after James had left her apartment. As the CEO turned to the agents and HR, he made it clear. She's fired. Effective. Immediately. The company will fully cooperate with the investigation. At home, James sat quietly with Maya, helping her study for a history quiz on the civil rights movement. She asked, "Daddy, is it over?" James smiled, placing a hand over hers. No, baby. But the truth finally has a voice. And now, it couldn't be silenced. It started with a whisper and ended with a federal investigation. Eleanor Whitman had built her empire on charm, power, and silence. The CEO of Crestline Dynamics knew exactly how to play the game, smile in public, scheme in private. And when she set her sights on destroying James Carter's career, she assumed it would be effortless. After all, he was just a senior analyst, a black man, a single father, easy to discredit, easy to replace. But she didn't realize James wasn't playing her game. He was building his own. It began when James drove Eleanor home after the company's annual party. She was drunk, barely coherent, and he offered to get her home safely. He stayed just long enough to make sure she was okay, then left. But days later, Eleanor summoned him into her office, holding up a photo of herself in bed, disheveled, vulnerable. "You took advantage of me," she said, coldly. "Do you really think anyone will believe you over me?" James sat quietly, refusing to react. Because what Eleanor didn't know was that he had already predicted this exact move. For over 2 years, James had been silently documenting his experiences. Every microaggression, every racially tinged comment, every unfair performance review. He'd saved emails, recorded meetings, and compiled spreadsheets that revealed a pattern of systemic bias across the company. He wasn't just defending himself, he was preparing to expose everything. But the turning point came with one name: Sarah Chun. Sarah had once been Eleanor's assistant, a sharp, capable Asian woman who was abruptly fired for incompatibility. Behind closed doors, Eleanor had mocked her accent, dismissed her work, and referred to her as too sensitive. When Sarah filed a discrimination claim, Eleanor buried it under technicalities and silence. What Eleanor didn't know was that Sarah had come to James, and she brought receipts. Together, they approached Amanda Rodriguez, a high-profile civil rights attorney. When Amanda reviewed the evidence, audio recordings, emails, performance data, and even private chat messages between executives, she saw the depth of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just workplace bias. It was a culture of calculated exclusion, led by someone who believed she was untouchable. And she wasn't just targeting people of color. She was weaponizing her identity as a white woman in power to frame, silence, and destroy careers. As Amanda prepared the case, James revealed one final asset: a private monitoring system he had installed months ago after being excluded from executive meetings. That system had captured every call, including a damning conversation between Eleanor and another executive, Margaret Thompson. People like him always think they belong at the top. You deal with them before they start lawsuits. A single black man against a respected white woman? I've already won. That recording changed everything. The Department of Justice, already investigating large corporations for racial bias, immediately flagged the case. Crestline Dynamics became a primary target in a federal probe. And while Eleanor bragged to colleagues about cleaning up HR issues before they exploded, James was in a secure video call with federal agents, walking them through every file, every timestamp, every lie. Then came Monday. Eleanor was preparing for a lunch meeting with investors when HR knocked on her office door, followed by 2 federal agents. Within moments, her world began to collapse. As they played back her own words, her voice cracking with disdain, her justifications began to falter. When confronted with the manipulated HR data, altered to lower the performance, scores of Black and Latino employees, she had no defense. Her evidence against James, proven fabricated. Her smear campaign, documented and traceable. And worst of all, her power, gone. The CEO fired her on the spot. The DOJ opened a full-scale investigation. Shareholders withdrew support, and the company's reputation burned under the weight of truth. But James Carter didn't celebrate with headlines. That evening, he was home. helping his daughter Maya review her presentation on civil rights. Heroes. You should be one of them, she said softly. He smiled, brushing her curls back. I'm just a dad who refused to stay quiet. And in that silence, James had done something powerful. He proved that even in a world built to erase your voice, the truth, when documented, precise, and patient, can bring down giants. She thought she'd broken him. She didn't realize she had awakened something. Unstoppable. Eleanor Whitman believed she'd won. After all, James Carter had been suspended, his name tarnished, and whispers had filled the halls of Crestline Dynamics. What she didn't know was that James had spent the past 2 years quietly collecting the truth: emails, performance, data, voice recordings, even security footage. And now, her false accusation wasn't just unraveling, it was detonating. While Eleanor bragged on the phone to another executive, one black man against a respected white woman, this will disappear in weeks. James was in a conference call with the Department of Justice. The recordings he provided, including Eleanor's own voice, mocking diversity and manipulating HR records, became the cornerstone of a federal investigation. Days later, the FBI walked through Crestline's front doors. Eleanor's smirk disappeared as her proud voice played back in a sterile conference room, damning her with every syllable. She was fired on the spot. Her empire crumbled, but James didn't gloat. He went home and helped his daughter finish her homework, reminding her, good people don't always win right away. But when they're patient, they win. Right. Sometimes the most powerful resistance is quiet, steady, and unseen. You don't need to shout to be strong. The truth, when backed by evidence and purpose, is louder than any lie. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced injustice and stood your ground? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because we tell stories that reveal what power really looks like when it's rooted in truth.